On today's show, the Nets are blown out by the Lakers in their final game before the trade deadline. What should fans make of these recent lopsided losses? And what am I hearing about Brooklyn's trade plans before 3 p.m. Thursday? I'll answer that on today's episode of Locked On Nets.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to Locked On Nets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm your host, Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. And on today's episode, I'm going to be recapping Brooklyn's 125-109 loss to the Los Angeles Lakers on Tuesday at Barclays Center. And I'm also going to outline the latest trade intel surrounding the Nets as the deadline approaches. We are now about 2 days out from the deadline, under 2 days out from the deadline. But before that, want to get into this loss. This was another fairly embarrassing Nets loss, at least early on. The Nets have had a lot of really lopsided losses as of late. They obviously had the 50-point losses to the Knicks and the Pistons. They also had the 39-point loss to the Clippers, during which they also trailed by 50. And this looked like early in this one that this could be another really embarrassing loss. I mean, this was one of the more lopsided first halves I can remember at Barclays Center since my time covering the team. The Nets were down 69-40 at the break, but they trailed by as much as 39 during the first half of this game. And both in terms of the result on the court and also the disparity amongst the fans in attendance. There were obviously a lot of Lakers fans. There are always a lot of Lakers fans in this one. But this was a completely non-competitive first half. And the combination of what was happening on the court and the fan atmosphere in the arena, it was pretty embarrassing early on. I mean, the Lakers were just messing around out there, frankly. I mean, they were, throwing ridiculous passes. They were getting out in fast breaks, behind the back dishes, deep threes, lobs, like Showtime Lakers, Harlem Globetrotters, like whatever, kind of illusion you want to make. It looked like that in the first half. And the many Lakers fans that were in attendance, they were having a grand old time. They were on their feet. They were cheering for the LeBron dunks, the Luka step backs, whatever else you want to say. And it was just another game that looked like it wasn't going to be competitive whatsoever. I mean, the Nets somewhat salvaged it because they won the second half and they ended up only losing by 16. But because they were down by so much, the entire second half was pretty much garbage time. And you look at it, these recent non-competitive losses that the Nets have had, this is the ugly side and this is the danger of tanking. Because obviously the Nets are tanking at this point. There's no, illusions about it. There's no disagreements about it. They had that 7-3 stretch in December. It looked encouraging. Some people were talking about a play-in push, and they have completely fallen off a cliff amid some more aggressive, tanking moves as of late with, keeping people out and some things along those lines. As I said, this is the ugly side of tanking. Obviously, you want to lose, but you don't want to let go of the rope too much. You want to walk that line of stacking losses, but also not forming bad habits. And that's really difficult to do, especially as you get into the dog days of the season. And this was, really, as I said, another non-competitive loss. And what you really want to try to do in a tanking situation, obviously, is be competitive on most nights, regardless of the losses, because that is what is going to be best for player development. And the Nets have had some tight losses during this recent stretch, whether you talk about the Celtics game, the Suns game, whatever other game you want to talk about. But 4 of the last 8 games have been embarrassingly lopsided. And it's not all that surprising when you look at the personnel on the floor and the losses, the teams that those losses have come against. I mean, those 4 losses, it's the Knicks, the Clippers, the Pistons, and the Lakers, all bigger, physical teams with a lot of veteran experience. And you look at the Nets and the personnel that they have out there, I mean, they're playing 4 rookies every night, sometimes 5. And all of those rookies, like, they have their moments, but they have a lot of moments where they look like they're not ready to be in an NBA rotation. And all of them are very much developmental. I mean, most of these guys, when you talk about the Nets' 5 rookies, are not very athletic or physically imposing. The Nets made a bet on their high field skill sets and that they will be able to develop physically and as shooters to round out their skill sets. And with that, there's going to be some growing pains. When you talk about 4 19-year-olds and then 1 21-year-old and Danny Wolf, I mean, as I said, they've all had their moments this season, but for the most part, when you play against these bigger, more experienced, more physically imposing teams, they're going to struggle. And that was the case tonight, and that was the case in a lot of recent losses. And if you're a Nets fan who's getting really upset about this, I understand that. But there were also a lot of Nets fans that I remembered earlier in the season who were calling for the rookies to play. They wanted the rookies to play. I mean, Tyrese Martin, Jalen Wilson, some of these other guys were playing for the Nets, and they were keeping them a little bit more competitive. Terrence Mann also, who logs a DMPCD in this game. And you look at those guys, all three of those guys didn't play. Fans wanted to see the rookies playing over those guys. We've seen that a lot more as of late. And with that, you're going to get some ugly losses like that. But I will say that I did not think that the effort was at a good level in this one. I mean, the Nets were getting beat up and down the floor. They were getting, out-rebounded offensively on the boards pretty lopsidedly in the first half, and I just didn't think that they came out with enough urgency, enough aggressiveness, enough hustle early on in this game. But as I said, you have 4 or 5 rookies playing outside of that tonight. You have MPJ, Noah Clowney, Nick Claxton. Those are the 3 guys in the starting lineup. MPJ came out kind of strong. He was playing hard, but he was struggled from 3 in this one. He was 0-9. Noah Clowney, Nick Claxton didn't make much of an impact. And then you look at the bench, you have a disengaged Cam Thomas who, might have played his final game as a Net tonight. We'll talk about that. Zaire Williams and Day'Ron Sharpe, those are the guys off the bench. You didn't get much out of Thomas and Zaire. You're not going to get a lot of them, a lot from them, at least offensively on most nights, or, defensively or offensively, depending on whether you're talking about Cam Thomas or Zaire. So, you don't have like the best group outside of the rookies. When you're playing that many rookies alongside them, it's not going to accentuate their skill sets, and that's going to lead to some lopsided losses. So hopefully the Nets can figure it out, but this is the reality of tanking, and we're getting into the dog days of the season. We're probably 2/3 of the way through the season now. In this last third of the season, you hope that they could have some more competitive losses. And I think that Jordy is going to try to make it a point to, kind of pursue that and obviously take some steps to ensure more competitiveness. But as the season goes on, it usually doesn't get more competitive when it comes to teams with a tanking agenda. So we'll see how it plays out, but the Nets are stacking losses, and that is good, at least in the draft lottery sense. And, if you're talking about this game and Nets who did bring it, shout out to Day'Ron Sharpe, because Day'Ron Sharpe came off the bench tonight, and he was probably one of the only reasons that this Nets game got close in the second half. Day'Ron finishes with 19 points, 14 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals, 9 of 12 shooting in 25 minutes off the bench, and he just continues to look like an absolute beast, one of the best centers in the league, a guy who, could frankly be a starting center in a lot of situations. And, we'll see how they approach that in the offseason, whether that's extend him or not. But shout out to Day'Ron, because he did bring it tonight on a night where it looked like a lot of Nets guys didn't want to be on the floor and they were getting blown out. He did make a noticeable impact and did kind of leave it all out there. So that was nice to see. But we got less than 2 days until the NBA trade deadline. This was the Nets' last game before the trade deadline. And with that, there's going to be a lot of questions over the next, 40 hours or so leading up to 3 p.m. on Thursday. So what is the latest I'm hearing about the Nets on the trade front? MPJ, Cam Thomas, potential salary dump trades. I'll get into all that when I continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, it's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Guys, hiring isn't just about finding someone willing to take the job. It's about finding the right person with the right background who can actually help your business move forward. And if you want candidates who match what you're looking for, Indeed Sponsored Jobs is the move. Because instead of hoping the right person stumbles across your post, Indeed helps you match with quality candidates by boosting your job listing to the people who fit your specific criteria, like skills, certifications, and location. Guys, if I were hiring, I wouldn't just want someone who can help. I'd want someone with real experience who can jump right in. That's what I like about Indeed. You get specific and target exactly what you need. It saves time because you're spending less energy sorting through mismatches. And with Sponsored Jobs, your post gets seen by candidates who are actually a fit. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. The NBA trade deadline is basically here, and we want to give you a free month of our new Everydayer Club to help you get ready. If you need a group chat to keep up with the chaos, join ours. The Everydayer Club gets you access to a group chat on Discord just for Nets fans, plus national chats where you can hang out with fans from across the league. You also get ad-free versions of this show, and if you sign up by the trade deadline on February 5th, you can use code DEADLINE to get your first month free. Tap the link in the show notes to learn more. Coming back from the break on today's Locked On Nets episode following another lopsided Nets loss, this time to the Los Angeles Lakers. But we're done talking about the game, and we got to get into the latest trade intel that they have, the latest developments and buzz surrounding the Nets on the trade market, because we are less than 2 days away from the NBA trade deadline. And the first thing I want to talk about is Michael Porter Jr., because he is obviously the biggest decision that the Nets have to make at this trade deadline. He is the most significant player on this roster, and he is perceivably outside of the Giannis Antetokounmpos, the Jaren Jackson Jr.'s, the James Hardens, a lot of trade activity today. That kind of next tier of guys, he is the top guy who is perceivably available going into this trade deadline. But from what I'm hearing around the league, it's looking increasingly likely that Michael Porter Jr. is going to be on the Nets past the trade deadline. And I have been told that, for the last few weeks, I've been told that the Nets haven't actively been shopping MPJ, but they have been taking calls from several interested teams over that last month. And that is a similar, kind of language to what we heard about the Nets with Cam Johnson at last year's trade deadline. And with the Nets taking calls in MPJ, there have been several teams who have, voiced interest, but the Nets have held firm on a very high asking price whenever they've received those calls. Some people have said 2 first-round picks is what the Nets are asking for, and that's a price that teams have just not been willing to meet. Teams aren't willing to give up 2 first-round picks for Michael Porter Jr. right now, and I don't find that all that surprising because despite what Michael has done on the court this season, which has been extremely impressive, he's still a guy who was viewed as a distressed asset this past offseason. He's still a guy with a significant injury history, and he's still a guy who's going to be looking for an exorbitant contract extension this summer. So it's not all that surprising that teams are not willing to meet that asking price, and it's also not that surprising that the Nets are setting the asking price that high, because I have been told that they're comfortable keeping him through the deadline and bringing this into the offseason, which is, again, is a similar language and similar philosophy to what we've heard with Cam Johnson at last year's trade deadline. And we all know how that ended with Cam Johnson in the following summer. And on that note, while it appears unlikely that MPJ is going to be traded at this year's deadline, from what I've been hearing, that isn't so much as, the Nets viewing him as a long-term piece as it is, them setting that asking price high, seeing what they can get, and it potentially being a better time to field offers and the market potentially being in a better place during the summer. And that's a number of reasons. That could be for a number of reasons. But, first, you look at the Giannis Antetokounmpo trade sweepstakes, there's a lot of teams who could potentially be in on the bidding for Michael Porter Jr., who are keeping their powder dry and who are waiting to see how the dominoes fall in that Michael Porter Jr. trade sweepstakes. You also, once you come, into the offseason, you have more teams that are going to have more picks available to trading. You also have teams that every year during the playoffs, they think they're good, during the season. They get into the playoffs. They have earlier exits than they expect. They're looking to make some moves on the market to kind of reshuffle their team and bolster their rotation. And that's why it is easier sometimes to do these trades during the offseason when there is more of an understanding of where teams stand, when more picks are available to be traded, when you have clarity on what the draft order is going to be, all of that stuff. So with that being said, if a deal doesn't come to fruition, from what I've been told and from things that I've been hearing, people fully expect the Nets to revisit trade conversations surrounding Michael Porter Jr. during the offseason. And I've been, there's been a lot of questions about, do the Nets potentially view Michael Porter Jr. as a long-term piece? He's a guy who's, 27 going on 28. He's still young. He's playing at an all-star level, even though he didn't make the team this year. The Nets are going to try to be more competitive next season because they owe that first-round pick swap to the Houston Rockets. And I'm not saying that Michael Porter Jr. can't be a part of the Nets' future, but from things I'm hearing, I think that there is going to be a sell high mindset, a recoup assets mindset when it comes to Michael Porter Jr. if it goes past his trade deadline during the offseason, because MPJ is going to be entering the final year of his contract at $40 million this summer. He's going to be eligible for an extension in July, and given the way that he's played this season, he's going to be seeking probably a long-term exorbitant deal. And with the Nets, with where they're at in their timeline, with Porter's injury history, I would just caution people about the prospect of him being with the Nets, long term, about them potentially giving him an extension. I think that from what I've been hearing, I'm not sure that they're viewing him as a long-term piece. I think that it is pretty likely that they're going to revisit trade conversations in the summer. And at that point, there potentially could be more suitors looking to get in on the market for Michael Porter Jr. And look, I think MPJ has proven that he could be a valuable player to a contending team. You look at, obviously, he won a championship with the Denver Nuggets. He proved that he was able to fit alongside stars. And you look at what he's done with the Nets, he's been able to scale up that role, getting into a number one top scoring option for the Nets. And he's maintained his efficiency and then some. And I'd say that he's made a playmaking leap. I mean, he's been pretty good as a passer. Like, not assist numbers aren't huge, but he's consistently made the right play. He's taken care of the ball decently, and he's been a player who's had some of the most gravity in the NBA. So when you look at that, you look at the number one role that he was able to play with the Nets, you look at the number 3 or number 4 role that he was able to play with the Denver Nuggets, there could be kind of a middle ground there that I think should attract a lot of teams around the league. And with the Nets being in this rebuilding timeline, like, you look at them, the most significant way that people thought maybe they could fast track the timeline was the Giannis Antetokounmpo trade, and I wouldn't fully close the door on that, but it's looking very unlikely that the Nets are going to be the team that pulls that off, even if this drags out into the offseason. And with that, they're really committing. Like, if they get a top pick, during this draft, which is looking like they're going to have a pretty good chance given how things are playing out with how they're playing as of late and where they are at in the draft lottery standings, they're really going to be on a younger timeline. I mean, you have 5 rookies, 4 of which are 19 years old. Danny Wolf's 21. Noah Clowney's 21 going on 22. And then you're bringing in another guy who's probably 19 years old. Michael Porter Jr., you do still need some veterans. You do still need some good players. But a player in MPJ who's going on 28 years old, who has that kind of injury history, who's going to be looking for as exorbitant of a contract as he is, there could be other guys who are maybe younger or who are buy low candidates that you think could pop, who might be a better allocation or a better investment given where the Nets are at in their timeline, especially when you factor in what the Nets might be able to get for MPJ in a trade and the opportunity cost of not trading him. So because of all that, because of things that I've been hearing, expect Michael Porter Jr., it seems like, to be on the Nets past the trade deadline, but I do think that a trade is going to be very much in play once we get into the offseason. But there are some other notable Nets moves that could be made. Cam Thomas, what is going to happen with him? Has he played his last game as a Net? Potential salary dump trades. There's a lot of things going on around the league. How can the Nets get involved in all that? I'll answer that when I close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Guys, instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, outlining the latest trade buzz that I've been hearing surrounding Brooklyn, with us less than 2 days away from the NBA trade deadline. And you talk about the most significant names that you were hearing potentially, on the move for the Nets at this trade deadline. It was Michael Porter Jr., who I just hit on. It was Nick Claxton. And then you got guys like Cam Thomas, like Day'Ron Sharpe. The Claxton and Sharpe thing, it seems like they're pretty locked into being on the Nets past the trade deadline. Anything can change in these last 40 hours or so. But the Celtics were one of the main teams who were looking to swing a trade for a big man. They got Nikola Vucevic from the Bulls. Maybe that potentially puts the Bulls in the market for a big man. I mean, never say never, but it seems like Nick Claxton is going to be on the team into the summer, and that makes sense because he is on a descending contract that might be more easy to be moved in the summer in terms of matching salary, and it might be more attractive. And then Day'Ron Sharpe, I just don't think the Nets want to move on from Day'Ron Sharpe, given the way that he's produced, given how valuable he's been to them, and given how they may be able to lock him in on a value contract. So you look past that, Cam Thomas is the next guy that you're looking at. And has he played his last game as a Net? Cam checked out of this game against the Lakers with like 5 minutes and 30 seconds left in the fourth quarter. He walked very slowly to the bench, took a while. Like the refs were actually waiting to inbound the ball until he, finished his slow walk off the court. And I couldn't help but think, looking at him walk off the court, is this the last time I'm going to see Cam Thomas in a Nets uniform? Is this the last time I'm going to see him walk off this Barclays Center court to that Nets bench? And that's a very real possibility, because we all know what the situation has been, with Cam Thomas, obviously, since coming back from that injury, losing his starting spot, pretty much looking like a shell of himself, looking disinterested a lot of times, even when he is interested, not playing that well. It's just with the Nets trying to get minutes for all of these rookies, with some of the other guys they have on their team that could be fits in the backcourt long-term, whether you talk about a guy like Tyrese Martin or, Jalen Wilson, not really a backcourt player, but there's those types of guys who are losing minutes because Cam Thomas is playing over them right now. And then you're also trying to get all these rookies minutes. It just doesn't really make much sense to have Cam Thomas on the roster when it's pretty clear that he's not a long-term piece. So it seems like if the Nets have their way, Cam Thomas will be traded before 3 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. But I'll also say that I'm just not sure where he's going to go. Like, I'm just not sure that anybody wants Cam Thomas, or that the Nets will even be able to include him in a trade, because nobody has wanted Cam Thomas up to this point. Whether you talk about the free agent market or a trade market, he just hasn't had a market. And you look at the way that he's played this season, with him starting out, the Nets struggling 0-7 with him in the lineup to start the year. Their defensive struggles, one of the worst defensive ratings through 8 games in NBA history. Then he, goes out. They start to play better. He comes back. They're bad again. He hasn't been playing well offensively. He's kind of been in this like much scaled down role in the second unit. The defense doesn't remain good. I just don't know what kind of market he's going to have. So really the way that I could see Cam being included in the trade is if he's just like a salary filler in a different deal, that maybe it's like a salary dump deal. Maybe he just gets thrown in as a sweetener. Maybe he's just something where the Nets are offloading his salary and they're taking a bigger salary as a salary dump, like something along those lines. But I just don't know who wants him right now. And I think it's very much a possibility that he's included in a trade, but I think it's also a possibility that there just isn't an opportunity for the Nets to offload him. And if they can't offload him, how are they going to approach this the rest of the season? Because I think it's pretty clear that the situation just doesn't make that much sense for Cam. Sure, they could keep him on the roster and they could continue to play him in the role that he's been playing. But just what sense does that make? You're trying to get rookies minutes. You have a guy like Tyrese Martin who has earned minutes, who is not playing because Cam Thomas is in the rotation right now. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think that it just doesn't make that much sense for Cam Thomas to be on this roster past the trade deadline. And that is complicated by the fact that it just doesn't seem like he has that much of a trade market. So maybe the Nets can find a deal where he could be a throw-in. Would they entertain waiving him? I don't know, giving him an opportunity maybe to join a playoff team and showcase some things before he hits unrestricted free agency next summer or this coming summer. We'll see. All of those things seem to be possibilities. And last thing I want to talk about on the trade front is potentially the Nets just being a team that could get involved as a third team in multi-team trades and being a facilitator, in multi-team deals, because the Nets still do have the most cap space in the league at $15.2 million. And there are still teams that are looking to open up space for other moves, whether you talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers who are reportedly shopping Lonzo Ball's $11 million contract, trying to open up some more space so they can maneuver. They just got James Harden for Darius Garland, and they potentially have some more big-time aspirations trying to reshuffle their roster before the deadline. The Minnesota Timberwolves, another team that's trying to get off more money after they just made some moves earlier today. You have teams like the Magic, the Suns, the 76ers, all of whom could be looking to dip below the luxury tax before 3 p.m. on Thursday. So there are all those teams who are trying to get off money. I have heard that the Nets have been active around the league, trying to get involved in some of these deals, trying to get involved in conversations to take back unwanted money in return for draft compensation, something that we saw them do plenty of this past offseason. But while the Nets are the only team in the league with, they have the most cap space in the league leading up to the trade deadline, there are a handful of teams who have generated big trade exceptions that can use those trade exceptions to take on unwanted contracts in return for draft compensation. Now, those teams already have more money on their payroll. That could push them up towards the luxury tax or apron, so they might not want to do that. But it's not like the Nets are the only team at this point who can take on unwanted contracts. There are other teams that have more have mechanisms to do that. But the Nets do have, the most financial flexibility in terms of below the salary cap, below the luxury tax, below the aprons to be able to do that stuff. So we'll see. I would expect the Nets to be involved in those conversations leading up to Thursday, and we'll see if anything comes to fruition. But that's all I got for you guys on today's episode of Locked On Nets. If you guys do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy my content, take a second right now, smash that like button, leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. But that's got a day off tomorrow. The trade rumors are going to be in full swing, and then they'll have the Orlando Magic on Wednesday night after the trade deadline. So I'll have coverage of all that and more when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.